This is a 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning to the start of the meeting. Well, good morning, everybody. Commission members, please find your seats and we'll get started. No, seriously, we have to get started. That was a joke, but thank you. Well, good morning. The October 31st School Financing and Review Commission meeting will come to order. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the School Financing Review Commission. Would the recording secretary please call the roll? Just a reminder for commission members, please push the button on your microphone. It'll appear green when it is hot, and when you are done, please turn it back off. There's a limited number of these that we can have operational at any one time. So, would the recording secretary please call the roll?
Tom Breezy. Here. Jason Dolliver. Here. Ann Foster.
Here.
Shavonna Holman.
Present.
Shauna Koger.
Here.
Grant Latimer.
Here.
Luann Linehan.
Here.
Brian Maher.
Here.
Fred Meyer.
Here.
Aaron Ploss.
Here.
Keith Runge.
Here.
John Schwartz.
Here. I pushed
Sarah-
the button multiple times for the record, so.
Sarah Scott.
Here.
Liz Standish.
Here.
Paul Turman.
Here.
Senator Elliot Bostar. Senator Jana Hughes.
Here.
Senator Dave Merman.
Here.
15 voting members present, 2 non-voting members present.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room in the main entrance doors. Going to agenda item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting were provided with the notice of this meeting. A copy is also provided for each commission member. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion for agenda item 3?
I'd move approval.
Second.
We've got a motion to approve from Commission Member Turman and a second from Commission Member Holman. Are there any comments to be made regarding the motion? Okay. Would the recording secretary please call the roll?
Brian Maher,
Yes.
Shauna Koger,
Yes.
Paul Turman,
Yes.
Keith Runge,
Yes.
Sarah Scott,
Yes.
Shavonna Holman,
Yes.
Tom Breezy,
Yes.
Aaron Ploss,
Yes.
Grant Latimer,
Yes.
Luann Linehan,
Yes.
Liz Standish,
Yes.
Ann Foster,
Yes.
John Schwartz,
Yes.
Fred Meyer,
Yes.
Jason Dolliver,
Yes.
15 yes.
The affirmative has it, and the motion to approve the minutes of the previous School Financing Review Commission meeting is adopted. Okay. Happy Halloween. Thanks for being here. We'll get a lot less formal now at this point. Today really is about work, and it's about being able to be in groups to get work done for the purposes that are outlined for this commission. And we thought that this might be a good way to do it. We'll really have three big phases to the meeting today. One is I'll talk just briefly about what are some of our timelines that we need to hit as a commission and some of our initial goals. The second thing is to review information that's already been presented and then talk about that information and report out that information in a large group setting. And then 3, get some new information that's presented to this group, get back into our small groups, have a conversation on the new information that is presented, and then share that as well. I don't believe this will be a quick meeting, but I do believe it'll be a productive meeting. For those of you who have said, when are we really going to do the work? I think today's that day. So I think we're really going to get started in that right now. I'll just maybe review a little bit of some timelines that will drive our work. Number one, you remember that we are required to have a report put together for the legislature by December 1. It needs to be submitted by December 1. And when this action came through the legislature last spring, I thought, boy, that's not very far away. And when I woke up this morning and thought about December 1, I thought, that is really not very far away. So we've got a lot of work to get done in this next month. And by way of that report, I would tell you that it's my goal that that report is the commission's report. So if you're wondering who's going to write it, my answer is we are. And I can't think of a more futile use of time than to have all of us in a room trying to write one report. So that's not what we're going to do. But I do think what we're going to do really is take the information that we get from our work time today. We'll do our best to put that into minutes, and then we'll have those minutes be reflected in the report December 1. Between now and our next meeting, which is November 18th, between now and our next meeting, we will begin, in the department here, we will begin to put together what we think that report should look like so that all commission members will have a chance to weigh in on that report. And as I did in terms of putting together the agenda and the format for this meeting, I'll work very closely with the executive committee on what that report should look like. So that report shouldn't be biased based on what Brian Maher thinks he's hearing. but rather it should be reflective of what the members of the commission are coming up with. So that's the goal in how we're putting that together. And I do mean we are putting that together for the December 1st deadline that we have with the legislature. So one of the things I want you to think about today as you're going through the information in the small groups is what information is relevant for that December 1st report, that first submission that we have to the legislature. What are we talking about that goes in that we're ready to report on for December 1st? The next time frame that I think we need to consider is the calendar year 2026. What do we think about that today maybe that isn't going to be fully baked for December 1st, but it's really important for us to be considering as a commission and should go into the phase 2 portion of what we have to talk about. And I'll let you decide that. I won't give you any examples because I don't want to predetermine what's important for December 1 and phase 1 and what's important for calendar year 2026 and phase 2. But I think there are going to be things that we're just not ready to report on that are still very, very important that we need to put into phase 2. And I would tell you in an executive committee conversation, we've had some of those already where we've said, yeah, that's important, but we won't be ready to get through all that by December 1. So let's put that into a phase 2 parking lot. And then the other thing that I want you to think about as things come up are what does phase 3 look like? And I really think phase 3 is how do we make sure that whatever we come up with for December 1 and for calendar year 2026, where I really think we can make some hay, so to speak, what can we do beyond that to make sure that we have proper oversight of school funding in the state of Nebraska? So I think those are the 3 phases that you need to have at least in the back of your mind as we go through things today. What's important for the December 1 report? Remembering that is 1 month and 1 day away, not very far. What's important for us to have on our agenda for calendar year 2026, and then phase 3 will be kind of its own animal down the road. Okay. Questions on just that mindset as we break into the work that we have to do? Okay. Then I am going to ask Bryce Wilson to come on and prepare to talk to us about information that we've largely talked about already, but I want to make sure that either we refresh our memories or we know it again for the first time as we get prepared to talk in our groups about what's important for December 1. So any questions from commission members before we get into this review portion of the meeting? All right, Bryce, take it away.
All right, good morning. Bryce Wilson, Finance Officer, Department of Education. I'm going to start out. So again, this is really just the review of this, for this first time I'm going to talk to you, I guess, this morning. It's a review of what we covered the last time, but we're really going to try and draw out, I think, the key information that we presented last time that I want to just make sure everybody's aware of and has captured as you begin your discussions as groups. So we're going to go through, you should have a handout, historical information for School Finance Review Commission. You should actually have 2 handouts titled the same exact thing. That was my effort to make sure the commissioner didn't ask me to write the report if I titled him the same thing and showed him that my struggle with words and not numbers. So, but it's the shorter one, the one we went over the last time. Page 3 should say statewide school district revenue. That's the handout that I'm going to go over with you right now. So the other one we'll cover later. The key, I think, on this first page, and this is where I think the biggest kind of aha, at least to me in looking at the data, that I think we want to just make sure everybody's aware of, and that is when we look at like 2019-20 through 2022-23, there's pretty consistent breakouts of local, county, state, federal revenues for school districts. And what you'll see is for those 4 years there, the local portion of revenue for a school district's right around the 55 to 56% range. The state contributions to school district revenues in the 36 to 37, 34 to 37% range. So very consistent in how we're funding schools in that time period. Beginning in 2023-24, legislature started making a couple of significant changes to school district funding for Nebraska, and it reflects pretty significantly. Starting in year 2023-24, the trend starts to change where local contributions drop from the 56%, 55, 56% range down to 51%, and the state contributions increase from that 34% up to 39%. So a change. The really significant change begins with the 2024-25 data, and I just want to make sure everybody is reminded that those numbers are estimated. We don't have that actual data yet, so those are my best estimates. I will say that we had about just under 90% of the revenue that was coming in verified, so it's pretty good estimates, I think. I feel pretty confident in what those numbers are going to be. But the change is significant here. This is where, and this is really the key, we almost flipped as a state the contributions from local and state. So the local contribution, and this is really the school tax credit that drove the big difference here. That now pushes down the local contribution to 38%, and the state contribution increases to 53%. Almost a flip-flop. Not quite, but very close. So I think we really want to highlight there has been significant work done by the legislature and all those involved in school finance to make a significant change there. And so that, I think, is a key. I don't know if there's any questions on that data before I move forward, but I wanted to highlight that.
Bryce, I'd maybe just emphasize what you just said. I think that's really crucial. That there has been a lot of work done, and at least some members in this room, members of the legislature who have taken action, who have put us on a trajectory for more of a state contribution. And if you think back to school funding years ago, I remember being a superintendent saying, geez, if we could just get to that 45% mark that they've set, that would be really good. Well, we've hit that, and we've actually gone beyond that. And I think there's some good work that's been done there by the legislature and by the governor to get us to that point.
And just to highlight and piggyback off of that, I'm going to skip just a couple pages ahead. Page 5, we have, and I'm not going to go through all this, we had pulled together 11 different states to have a comparison, because that was one of the questions that had come up the meeting prior when we presented this in the September meeting. I think it's worth noting there that of those 11 states we looked at, the average local contribution was 43%, the average state contribution was 42%. So Nebraska was behind the curve prior to 2022-23, or in 2022-23 in those years prior, because we were around that 34% state, 56% local. But with the flip-flop, Nebraska now sitting at about 53% state funding, we're actually a decent amount ahead of that average of those 11 states in the surrounding area to us. So again, a big shift there compared to other states. I think that's worth pointing out. The other thing, on backing up one page, page 4, has property tax from local sources. And this also, I think, is fairly eye-opening. When you look through the data there, and what you guys have only goes through 2023-24, and it shows a decrease in that, property taxes kept increasing year over year over year until we get to 23-24, and you see just a small decrease in the amount of property taxes that were received by school districts. It dropped a little over $6 million, 0.27%. That's a nice change in the right direction, especially when you consider the increases in the previous years. But the 2024-25 estimated property taxes, again, didn't put it on here because we don't know for sure yet, but our really good estimate is it's going to come in a little under $1.7 billion. That's a 26% decrease from 23-24. and about $606 million less in property taxes coming in. So those are some really key numbers to what our state has recently done to address property taxes and how we fund school districts, and I want to really highlight that. Yeah, it's estimated to be, the number I have is again, it's estimated, but $1,696,880,000. And that's $606 million less than 23-24 and a 26% decrease from 23-24. Yes. State contributions to funding is going to be, it's going to be everything really that the state is contributing to school districts. The big ones obviously are going to be TIOSA. You're going to have special education funding, apportionment. Those are the big ones. Then there's some smaller grants that go out. The career and technical education money was a new funding source that came out from the legislature, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So that's in there. A couple other things like high ability learning grants, but those are the big chunks of the funding.
Mr. Wilson, the tax credit would be in there as well, correct? The
Uh,
front-loaded
yes.
tax credit, yeah.
Yes, the good clarification. So all of the tax credits, so significant pieces also are the homestead exemption, the property tax credit, and now the school tax credit. Those are the 3 big tax credits that make up the state contribution as well. Of the property tax credit, the total property tax credit, so how much is going to community colleges versus the school districts?
The original property tax credit fund, what percent of that is included in that number?
I don't know off the top of my head. Sarah.
I think Sarah might know, yeah.
Approximately 55 to 60% of the total.
Bryce, is it fair to say the big increase in state funding to education really came through 3 sources over those 2 years? The $1,500 per student in foundation aid, the increase in special education to 80%, and then the property tax credit. So as we see it go.
School tax credit, but yes.
Yeah, as we see that move from the 38 to the 53, that was the 3 big mechanisms to do so.
Yep, absolutely, those are the 3. Right, and hit the nail right on the head.
Thank you.
It does, yeah, so it's just proportionate of the levy, the school levy in the district divided by the total levy in the district. So, but on average, it's 55 to 60. It's creeping closer to 60.
We really broke that down in the data that I'll present later this morning, breaks down what that looks like district by district and different kinds of districts like class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and different levy breakouts too. So we have that broke out in several different ways to look at it later.
And we're assured that those factors are all solid, that we're not gonna see any kind of creep the other way. I mean, they're gonna be, as we make plans to go forward, those are gonna be solid percentages that we can work with.
I don't think that those percentages as far as total funding are locked in place. No, I think without being addressed by legislature, you'll see a slow decrease. The only one that I would say would not be the case would be the special education is designed to stay around 80% funding. So that one will continue to stay at the same percentage. But the others, as normal spending growth occur, the state would have to match that in their contributions to be able to maintain those percentages.
So moving forward, that creep is something that I guess I've always worried about over the years, as we've seen that, that becomes a red flag, that's something maybe this group can really sink their teeth into to make sure that doesn't happen, so we don't go the other way.
That is the whole point of this commission, I think, is saying, where are we at with school funding? How is TIOSA working? Making recommendations from this group to ensure that whatever that number that we want state funding to go to stays. Because over the last 20 years, when this wasn't in effect and the legislature let valuations rise normally, but they didn't do any tweaking in TOs that have forced the state to put more funding to schools. As valuations creeped up, it's like, oh, you have the means to pay for it. The state doesn't need to come in. That, to me, is what this group is for. So thank you for mentioning that.
Tom Breezy, there is an inflator in the school tax credit, isn't there? What is it? Is it 3.5%? Or is it a percentage of the, we need, somebody from the legislature should figure it, it's still in the bill, because the original income tax credit for property tax credit, that's now the school tax credit, had an inflator in it, meaning it automatically goes up a percentage each year, but I can't remember what it is. It's not big enough probably, but.
It goes up by a stated amount each year until through 2029, I believe.
Okay.
Then after that, is it based on the allowable growth rate, which is the increase in property? Maybe, go ahead.
I think I found it, I think it's 3%. And so I think we started in 24, 25 with 750 million. And then it's set numbers just as, Mr. Breezy said, up to 902 million in 29, 30, which I think is what you're remembering, and then it's 3% thereafter. So I think you're making a really good point that there were some efforts made by the body to address growth of not having as much creep. Still a valid conversation, but I think you're making a really good point. Absolutely, but yeah, thank you. And this is just rough, I did some looking between our last meetings, so there could be official numbers that vary from what I'm saying, but I think it's close, so.
There's also a provision, if you'll recall, as the state economy grows, if excess revenues increase, then there's a trigger to divert more money to that fund also. But there's the 3% cap, or the 3% guarantee.
Great conversation. Bryce, more on your presentation?
Yeah, a couple more things I think, and this is context that goes right along with the discussion that we're having, I think is helpful. Page 7 of that handout that we're going through right now from last meeting has the historical general fund levy information for the school districts. And I think the key that I'd really point out here, we broke it out and did every 5 year look and broke them into some different categories there of levies that school districts have for their general fund. It's pretty easy to see that we've had a significant shift. And you look at 2000, 2001, and almost 92% of our school districts were above 95 cents in their general fund levy. And compare that to 24, 25, and we are significantly, we only have 20 districts left that are above 95 cents. Out of the 245 school districts. So there's been a significant change in the levy rate for school districts, and I think that's key to note. I think we're all probably aware that's not because property tax requests have went down, it's because valuations have increased, and we'll talk about what that is a little bit later, and the valuation per student is in some of the data we're going to present later. But just key to kind of see what is happening across our state over that historical time. And then the last thing that I was going to cover on this handout for right now is also, I think, important as we talk about those, as the conversation just occurred, talking about what the state's increase in their funding is going to be, and that's on page 9, the general fund expenditures. And I also want to point out a change from the document that we handed out last time. So this shows, going back 2002, 2003, what the general fund expenditure change has been year to year. Also provides a 5, 10, 15, and 20-year average. We had an incorrect formula in our 5, 10, and 15, 20-year calculation last time. You'll note that 3.85% is our 5-year school district general fund expenditure increase, and that is 3.67 for 10-year, 3.46 for the 15-year, and then look at a 20-year average there, it's 3.88%. The question came up as well last meeting. What would that look like if you took the ESSER funds out that were significant during the COVID time period? I would just note on the 2022-23 year, it shows right on that line, it shows a 6.11% increase. Without ESSER funds, it's 1.11%. Significant decrease there. 23-24, it goes from 5.18%, including the ESSER funds, down to 4.59%. And then I'll go the 15-year average, and the 20-year average drops from 3.46 for the 15 to 3.42, and the 20-year average drops from 3.88% to 3.85%. So I think that's some of the context I think is important for maybe the conversations for the committee, and I don't know if there's other questions.
Could
That
we
you may
have
have?
a chart that compares these numbers to inflation for those years?
I'm sure it's something we could put together.
Okay, thank you.
Would we be open to also including a column of the employment index, which is of your Bureau of Labor statistic, cost of employing people, since 80 to 90% of school district budgets aren't spent on goods, they're spent on employing people?
Bryce, I'm looking at you for confirmation or not on that.
Oh, I'm sure with Sarah's help, or maybe we can, Department of Revenue's help, we can get to that. Yeah, I'm sure we can figure it out.
What I'm hearing is yes, likely. Okay, any other questions or comments? That was great conversation. I would say what we had just a couple of minutes ago is what we need to do now in small groups, and then we'll come back to the large group to continue that conversation. I've asked members of the executive committee, Liz Standish, John Schwartz, and Paul Turman, to lead the discussion at the table and to lead the report out at the end of the meeting, or later on in the meeting, to really talk about these things. One, what key information stood out to you from the reports? Two, what information from these reports relates to the phase one work of the commission? So we really got to figure out what's important to us between now and December 1. And then three, what discussion points might this group offer for discussion to the larger commission for the phase one work recommendations? And please be mindful all the while that we've got to put a report together very soon. So I think there were some good points brought up already about where we were, where we are now. And then the question from former Senator Meyer, I think, is a really good question. What happens so that we don't regress, or if it's our intention to regress, what happens to make sure that we do regress? I put both of those options out there just because I don't want to lead this group in any one direction. So I think those are some of the things that you have to that we have to go through. Those of you who we've asked to lead the groups, the floor is now yours. Those of you who are in the audience, I apologize for how boring I'm guessing the next half hour to hour might be, but I would just say we got work to do. So groups, get to work. Can I have everybody's attention just for a minute? There has been a request to ask if maybe the gallery, if you will, keep it down, and I'm sitting there going, how do we make this happen? I would tell you, I think we have a couple of options. One, if you could lower the volume a little bit, or two, you're welcome to go anywhere on this first floor that you would like. There's room out in the atrium. Please feel free to be out there, and I hope the request isn't disrespectful. I'm just trying to help aid in the work that we have to do up here. So thanks for listening.
that always an intent?
If I could have everybody's attention, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break for 12 minutes. It sounds arbitrary, I know. We'll take a break for 12 minutes, then we'll come back together as a large group to share out. So if you need more work in your small groups, wrap that up. We'll take a break, and we will be back together at 9:13. Thank you. This is a 1-minute warning. 1-minute warning. Okay. Welcome back. This portion of the meeting will be to share out. So at this point, I would ask if any of the groups want to volunteer on to kick us off on the sharing out of information that we discussed during the group. Good collaboration, I think, good conversation. And I thought it was interesting when I announced that we would have a break, and I got up and started milling around a little bit, and I was the only one that left the group. Everybody stayed and were working and having conversations, so I hope I wasn't too premature in calling the group conversation to a close, but we'll have another opportunity to do that here in a little bit. So, Dr. Schwartz, did I see you nod like you might be ready to share out?
I think you just nominated me, Doc.
There
So
you
yes,
go.
I'm happy to do it.
Take it away.
And just so I follow the instructions, would you like me to speak to all three questions?
I would, please.
Okay, great. Okay, so for question 1 and question 2, I think the same information applies, is what we determined, that some of the same observations in question 1 were some of the same things that we think are germane to phase 1 work. The first, and I thought Mr. Wilson stated this very clearly, we felt like he did early on, is just the portion of funding state versus local has flipped. If you look at the data that was presented, state funding in the years present, was as low as 34% state funded, and in the estimated year for 24-25, we're at 53%, and that is essentially a flip from what it had been in the state and local comparison, and we thought that was noteworthy. And to your point earlier, Dr. Maher, a compliment to our elected officials in here and our governor and his team for their work in recent years. A second point that we had talked about actually came from our first meeting together as a commission. We felt like it was a noteworthy observation that the original commission that met many years ago had set a target at 45%. We thought, thinking about what types of information should be in a report that maybe isn't widely known for the purpose of future policymaking, that noting what that original commission had set out to do would be good to be included. The third point that we thought was good information that stood out that also is related to our phase 1 work is the celebration that there from 23-24 to 24-25, $606 million less in school property taxes were collected as a result of some of the changes that have been made in recent years, and we saw that as positive, and obviously the net effect of that is the flipping of funding from state to local that was previously mentioned. We also discussed how we thought it was good information and a good takeaway to share in some form or fashion when it comes to comparable state funding. In the states that were presented, the portion of state funding we've gone from one of the lower state-funded school systems among the states that were presented to one of the higher states. And Mr. Wilson shared some data points there that we thought were significant. We also did talk as a group, though, about how we need to be cautious at how we look at that, because there's always a lot of factors from one state to the next that are hard to capture. So we think it's a good point to include in there, but also to note that there's context that may be good to dig into before drawing too many conclusions. Another item that we had discussed is how levies have 90+% were over the 95-cent threshold in 2000, 2001, And now 90+% are under 75 cents, and just noting the impact that both valuation have had, and then the lower end of the levies along with that. And then number 6, we just talked about school spending. It seems like that's a frequently discussed topic. It'd be good to include in the report. Was also noted by different members of the group, especially our elected officials. Context matters. One of the things that was shared is that there's some years in there that appear to have aberrations because of context outside of Nebraska. You know, we were at the national level in 2002, 2003. There were some economic conditions associated with the dot-com crash that were relevant. You have the ARPA funding following the Great Recession. We have ESSER funding, which is in the numerator of all the calculations. So transparently communicating the information, but also noting some of the context around the data points in a narrative form may have some value. And then on question 3, we probably could have talked for another good chunk of time on that, but some of the discussion that we had that we started leaning into was there's a difference between effective tax rate and the stated tax rate. You know, we had talked about with the front-loaded tax credit that if your tax rate's $1.15, your effective tax rate may be significantly less than that because it's being front-loaded, and that's maybe not something that, because it's so new, people have a grasp on yet, and is actually a relatively new takeaway for this group as well. And we were just beginning a conversation on the report, Dr. Maher, that you had emailed out a few weeks ago that's also in our packets. It's the 2024 School Property Tax Collection Report, which came from the governor's office, and one of the authors of that is here with Grant Latimer. We were just going through that, you know, when you look at total revenue collection, that it's actually really modest. And that some of the original intent behind this commission that Senator Hughes had communicated earlier is managing the formula, and that if we can manage the formula through this commission, that may create a more stable ride for taxpayers and for schools concurrently. I believe, Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's one of the key takeaways from the governor's office report from last November. Anything else, committee, that I'm leaving out? Okay, thank you.
So that's all you talked about? Appreciate that. Thanks so much. Liz, are you ready?
Absolutely, and I'll ask my colleagues here to weigh in if I miss anything. I think it's interesting, our first takeaway that we landed on as well was the flip between the state and local contributions to schools, and think that that's somewhat of a headline bullet point that needs to come out in the report. One element that we added in our discussion, which was shared by the group, which was really important, was what was intended is actually happening. So I do think that's powerful to think about with all the complexities of the structures that we have. What the legislature, the governor's office set out to do is actually happening, and this report and data set actually exhibits how it's happening. Ms. Scott shared perspective about people did receive a different picture on their tax bill in December of '24. And so, but they're a little leery about it. And when they see that picture repeated maybe in December of '25, maybe this will start to get some understanding and traction as far as people understanding that the structure has changed. I shared that from phone calls into my office, the same. People just are really confused. It hasn't quite settled in yet how much has changed. And so this report presents an opportunity to communicate that and get the message out. That was part of our conversation as well, is this report can be a really powerful tool for communication across the state about how much has changed. And so that was kind of our beginning. We did talk about capturing some information related to both property tax credit funds and maybe the increases that are set in statute as we think about how do we keep this balanced going forward. And that would be a piece of information that would be great. Obviously highlighting the drop in 24-25. Mr. Breezy shared, you know, the individual taxpayer probably saw that relief sooner if they claimed it through their income taxes and through their income tax credit. We know part of the challenge was not everyone accessed those dollars. But that drop that we're seeing on the books now is really related to the fact that we're monitoring school district finances. where the net impact for the taxpayer happened a little bit sooner. We also talked about looking at school spending, and the CPI and a labor growth variable could be used. Also, it is nuanced for the reasons that Dr. Schwartz shared with federal funding coming in. I kind of noticed those individually as I was observing. Really, it was the federal funding that kind of jumped out to me. But then we also said, you know, it is hard to then capture the circumstance of every school district, whether they have enrollment growth, student need growth, what's going on at the local level. And those would have a significant factor on the expenditure growth, along with our process for negotiations and salary and benefit increases. We do think that there's probably maybe a phase 2 conversation about levies. The data is showing that levies are going down. The data could prompt a conversation about the levy structure, and is that something to look at going forward? And so we talked about that a little bit. We also talked about how the changes are still rippling through. So even the changes that were put in place with the legislation in 2023 are still rippling through the system. I mean, we're looking at estimated data for 24, 25, because those financial reports are just now getting filed. And so the idea that we're kind of still settling in to what's new would be part of it. And then we really felt, and just wanted to compliment the department, that we felt this entire report that was, this first report that was presented to us really is valuable. The state comparisons, I read some national research between our last meeting and this meeting, and kind of the threshold that they identified for various states of state funding resonated even in some of the national research that I read. So we really felt this whole document could be part of the report. But pulling out some of the headlines would probably help with the public communication. And then I'll just say, is there anything I missed to the rest? Okay.
Thank you, Liz. Dr. Turman?
Similar to the other two groups, I think, for related to question one, we really do need to reinforce that the work that has been done has actually brought the state a very long way in making the comprehensive change that we've looked at, reducing those levies, helping kind of address the property tax reductions that I think was a critical piece. So I think making sure that that's out there, we clearly are heading in the right direction. I think to Dr. Schwartz's comment about comparing other states, the opportunity to be able to look at the other state comparisons, and I agree with Dr. Standage, the report is really good as a framework, and how do we contextualize that narratively to drive kind of the message that we have. And I think it's also important that we're clearly looking at the policy differentiations in some of those states too that are driving the differentiations that we see. And I think Grant had noted, you take a state like Kansas, who has at the state level the opportunity to do property tax decisions that are now at the local level here, is having an influence on some of those. We also talked a little bit about the comparisons, just even in the last 5 years, so that people clearly understand what the cost increases have been. And that after we take out TIOSA, it's about a 2.7% increase on a year-to-year basis. Because I think everyone's general concern is that education continues to be a high-cost issue for the state, and there's clear rationales behind that, and how do we articulate that for people. We talked a little bit about, in response to question 2, the conversations that obviously happened in 88, 89, in 1990, that the goal was that 45%. We've clearly exceeded that. And how has the conversation as that as an aspirational goal, now we've exceeded it, should that mean that we don't still have a goal of getting to a better distribution than what we have right now? And then at times, I think regression's going to happen. It'd be really good to be able to look at the various sources that we have that are helping kind of drive that change. And especially today, I think revenue projections come out from the committee today. How does a change in projected revenue for the state
impact any of those different factors, and how are we prepared as a commission to be able to say, how do we intervene to help ensure that the momentum we've already gotten is going to stay where it's at? I think in relation to the last question, talked about a couple of different things. I brought up, that we've seemed to have a really strong change where the number of districts that are above the 0.75 has almost evaporated. Do we have a goal that we are not at that level? And I think my committee said that at one point, this will all kind of take care of itself, and setting metrics for that would not be warranted. But as we look at the three kind of primary sources, the 80% for special education, the school tax credit, and the $1,500 per student, the one element, the $1,500 per student, is the only one that doesn't have some sort of escalator. And that over time, if that stays flat, we're going to find ourselves having to adjust in some of the other areas. We also indicated that whether it's phase one or probably even this next year, continue to evaluate and assess TIOSA, and how do we move that formula from what is extremely complex to one that can be somewhat more simplified for individuals, and how the adjustments across the continued buckets needs to be influenced by our conversation around the formula itself. So anything else that I missed from the group?
I'd like to note, I think the other committees were cheating off of our work, as we had many similar conversations. A review of the tape, please.
Okay, thanks for all the reports. I think at this point, let's just open it up to the large group to dig into anything that you heard, maybe more clarification, and where do we go? Where do we go from here, based on the information that we had already? I would say one thing I heard from all three groups was that the story has flipped. The funding has flipped, and there should be some credit in the report to those who made that happen. That was one consistent thing that I heard. Question that I'll throw out there is, I heard everybody talk about the original designation, or at the time, aspirational goal of being at a 45% state funding. Is there anything in the report, is there any recommendation that we would like to put in the report in regards to a percentage? We all noted that the funding ratio had flipped. Is there anything we would like to say as a group, at least for this coming session for the legislature, that is aspirational? Do we want to stay where we are, as former Senator Meyer had mentioned earlier? Do we want to lower that? What do we want to do is my question.
Dr. Maher, I don't know that our conversation got quite that far. We really centered ourselves on those first three questions, but I think you're asking an important question. My recommendation would be, if that's a question you want us to answer, that maybe we have some time to process it in our small groups.
Yeah, I think, and we'll have time to do that again. So let me just throw that out there, maybe as a teaser for your next group conversation. Good point. Anything else that requires some clarification or conversation from the report out?
Just a high-level observation, Dr. Maher. I think, just hearing the similarities and what our takeaways were across tables, and thinking about this being our third meeting and what we've all learned together, I think this first report really has an opportunity for us to be an anchor document, to help others understand what we've come to understand through this process, so that somebody can pick this document up and understand where we've been, where we're at, as kind of a way to level set future conversations. Makes a lot of sense. There's one piece that I would add, and it was just what we were just starting to get into on the governor's report from November of 2024, and it's to extend upon what Paul had shared. The tax credit has an escalator, I think. Senator Breezy had shared that earlier. Special education is a percentage. We had talked in our meeting, our group as well, about how foundation aid doesn't have a growth component. There's also an inverse element to the LER as valuations increase and the LER doesn't decline. That's another element that can be adjusted within the formula. So I think we have two items that flex as other variables flex, and others that need to be more manually adjusted at the present time. So in order to, at minimum, maintain where we're at, we've got two of them that are flexing and two of them that currently are static. Just good to note for future dialogue.
Interesting, that's a conversation we had in this group too regarding the LER as a component that we hadn't talked about much as well. And I would emphasize one of the things that you said too, one of the notes that I had from our group was that we need to really paint the picture of where we are today in this first report. And how do we do that?
So I have one comment on the LER. I think the way the legislation is written and has been used, which has been much discussed negatively, the legislature can currently, or anytime it sees fit, lower that LER. So I'm not saying that, I don't know, I'd have to think about whether it should be in the report or not, but I think it's important for us to understand that we don't have to change a law for them to lower the LER. That is not a static number.
I actually think the 5 cents below is in statute.
Correct.
So I think
Oh,
if you
it
were
is?
gonna revise the 5 cents below, you would have to pass legislation, and I see Bryce nodding, which
Can I
is
leave that on for me?
confirmation.
Yes.
And I probably need to clarify, so I really appreciate that, Luann, that the others are on cruise control, so to speak. The tax credit will adjust, it's already in statute to adjust. The special education being a percent will adjust. It would require a manual adjustment from the legislature.
To lower to 95, it could go to 95.
Correct, yes, but it would
Okay.
require legislative action.
Right.
Yeah.
Just one additional thing, as I look at the data that Bryce showed on page 3, and I know that our focus right now is around kind of the comparison between local and state, but a very sizable piece of that also comes from the feds, and there is variation in the numbers. He just in the last 6 years, it's gone anywhere between 5 to almost 9%. I think an important element, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't put in the report, we need to keep a very close eye on any federal changes that happen, and how does that alter any of these formulas. We have a hearing going on right now for higher ed with the Appropriations Committee. If they do radical things around student financial aid, how does that impact our waiver programs? And so I think the landscape is constantly shifting for all of our sectors. I think we need to keep a pretty close eye on that and at least point it out that we need to come back probably to the table if something radically changes at the federal level and how it supports our schools.
Any other comments for the full group?
I guess I have a question. If we look at that very factor on the chart, 1920 to 24, 25, the amount of federal dollars, how do they flow into the TIOSA formula?
I'm looking at Bryce Wilson. He's shaking his head no.
So that's on an individual district basis that they're, from the
Yes.
feds right to the district?
Well, they flow through the department, but they're not included in the TIOSA formula.
Right. For anybody that might be listening, I'll just say that the funds come in and flow through the Department of Education out to districts, but the funds are not part of the TIOSA formula.
Either as as income or in any way?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments for the full group? Yes.
Yes, to the extent we're going to paint the picture of where we're at, and I think all groups mentioned school spending, and to Luann's point earlier, we do need that CPI data, and as Liz suggested, maybe a couple different columns there. So we do want to point that out anyway, as to where we're at, where we've been historically.
Good point. Any others? Okay. I'm going to ask that we go into the next portion of the meeting, and that is presentations on new information. We'll actually have two presenters on this. Number one, will be Bryce Wilson from the Department of Education. And number 2 will be Sarah Scott, Property Tax Administrator, and also a member of this commission. Bryce, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. So I'm assuming everybody else here gets as excited about numbers and diving deep as I do. So we'll dive right into some more numbers on kind of the same path of data that we've been covering. But this really is going to be a deep dive. And so this is the other document that I didn't go through earlier. It's the thicker of the two documents. I've added the word more historical information to this document for my own sake. I'm going to skip ahead just a pinch to page 7, and I will jump around just a little bit in this because there's a lot of district-specific information in this too, but go to page 7, and this is the last 5 years of funding, I guess, school district funding revenue information, and it's broke out into different percentages and categories. Starting in 2020-21, just want to note that we had 5% of our districts that were 21 to 40% of their funding came from local funds. 16% of the districts, about 40 of them, were in the 41 to 60% of local funding being their source of funding coming from that place. And then 65% were in the 61 to 80% of their total school district funding was from local funds, and 11% were over 81%. So significant amount of funding coming locally. You can see it's an inverse. The pie graph and the chart next to that one, the 2021 area, shows the state, and it's an inverse, as you would expect, since the big portion is coming from local funds. You jump down, and that stays, again, just like we talked about earlier, that stays fairly consistent from 2021 through the next 3 years. In 23-24, it starts to shift, but the big shift then comes in 24-25. And that's where you see now we have 60 districts, well, 7 districts that are getting less than 20% of their funding locally. 60% of the districts are getting 21 to 40% of their funding locally. And now the remaining districts, 178 districts left, are in the 41 to 60. We have nobody over 60% of funding coming locally now. That's a pretty big shift when you compare that to 2021. On the flip side, the state funding, you see that we have the majority of the districts are getting 41 to 60% of their districts. 87% of our districts get almost half of their funding from the state in the 41 to 60% category, and we have 20 districts that are above that, getting 61 to 80% of their funding from state. So there is, I think, just a different way to look at the data, but it shows the same picture as what we talked about earlier. We broke it out a couple different ways. If you flip back to page 4 now, we broke this into different ways to analyze the data. I think it is helpful to see how is this impact on different sizes of districts, different districts with different maybe valuations per student type of information as well. So it's a little maybe confusing at first when you look at this. There's actually 2 columns on page 4 and page 5. The left side of the columns shows the different class breakouts. So we have class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and class 5 districts. Let's see, I had this and I don't know what I did with it. Don't have it. So class 1 districts, I believe, has less, well, they're the smaller districts, and I can't remember the number exactly. 1,500, that's what I had in my head. Less than 1,500 people in that school district, total people in that school district. And I think it's then 1,500 to 5,000 are class 2s, and then 5,000 to 200,000, yep, is class 3s, and then basically class 4 is LPS, class 5 is OPS.
And Bryce, just for clarification, that is people living in the school district. That's not enrollment, and that's not a community population. That is people living within the district boundaries.
That is correct. Yep. So just breaking this down, the left side of the column is the class size, and it shows the same, we have the same breakouts there of local and state funding. It's a pretty, I guess, telling to show that 26, basically in the first one in class 1s, we have 26 are in 21 to 40%, 57. The percentages stay relatively even in class 1, class 2, and class 3s, and it really class 4 and class 5. So there's not massive differences between those different classes. There are small variations. Interesting enough, in the Class 2, there is a significant higher percentage of districts that are getting 41 to 60% of their funding from local, but there also is in the 41 to 60% range for the state funding too. So the other ones are around a third in the 21 to 40% and 66% in the 41 to 60% range. So it does, both Class 1s, Class 3s are very, very consistent in how their breakouts are. The Class 4 and Class 5s are both around 50%, or, well, Class 5 is 21 to 40% locally and 41 to 60% in the state. So it didn't show massive differences in those class categories. Thought maybe it would be a little bit more different. On the right side, we broke it down by general fund levy. The first category is less than 20-cent levies. We only had one district there, and that is a district that was, because of property tax authority, forced to have a 0-cent general fund levy. And then 21 to 40, we had 9 districts that are in that range. About 33% of them are getting 21 to 40% of their revenue locally. Really, I guess what I would focus on is you can see as the levies go up, there's definitely a correlation to a higher percentage of their funding coming from the state and less coming from local. It's a small gradual change in the funding in the amount of levies there, but that's what the data does show here, is that as those levies go up, basically what we're seeing is valuation per student is probably less. And so they're having a higher levy to try and generate enough revenue for their school district, but the state's still having to come in. So these are going to be your equalized districts at the higher ends typically. And the data, like I said, it's just a gradual, you can see it gradually shift from that 21 to 40 cent range to the above 81 cent range. So this, again, we're really diving in deep, and I think this might be information for you to really go back and reflect on a little bit in your groups, and maybe even between this meeting and the next meeting to help break that out a little bit more. On pages, and again, if you have any questions, stop me at any time, but I know, again,
Bryce, I'd maybe ask one just for clarification for anybody that might not know. This is essentially a school size graph going from smaller schools to larger schools as we go from Class 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I noticed Class 4 and Class 5 only have one school district. Can you tell me who that is?
Yep, Class 4 is Lincoln Public Schools, Class 5 is Omaha Public
I
Schools.
think for anybody that might not know, I just think that's important that they are in their own classification. Okay.
All the data that makes up that, the information on those pages 4 through 5 is then included on a district specific. So if you want to look at district specific information, that's going to be pages 8 through 18, I believe. So it shows each of their local, state, and federal funding percentages, as well as which class code they're in and their general fund levy. Then on page 20, we broke out, just based on questions that came up during the last meeting, valuation per student. And we did a 5-year look. So we started with 2010-11, and the majority, 165 of the 251 school districts in 2010-11 had less than $1 billion of valuation, $1 million of valuation per student. And the vast majority of the rest of the districts were less than $2 million valuation per student. By 2024-25, when you compare there's a significant shift of valuation per student. And again, that goes back to talk about those levy changes that we talked about the first time in the other document, and how those levies have dropped significantly. This data kind of shows, again, just that it's the valuation per student. I think Sarah's coming up here next. She has some really interesting information on, to me, it was very interesting on how Nebraska does valuations compared to other states. I'm assuming she'll cover that a little bit, but also just the impacts that has on the valuation per student. So, and then the remaining information in this document is just what is the district specific valuation per student data there for you, so you can look up and see if you have a question on a specific district, what that looks like.
One quick question on the data, the valuation per student, and then the local, state, and the contributions with the levies, are those the 23-24 school year, 24-25 school year?
Good question. So this is, this would be the 23-24.
All of these are 23-24?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, I take that back. It's 24-25.
Yes.
It is 24-25.
And it's estimated.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
the estimated numbers I used to come up with the 24-25.
Both of them,
Yes.
24-25, both
Yep.
estimated?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Bryce,
Yes.
so on page 20, these charts kind of show why some people would say TIOSA is broken down. Because the valuations didn't change equally across the state. You first had the ag valuations skyrocket, followed in the last few years by urban and suburban valuations. So how hard, because you have all, how hard would it be to break this down by year, by school year?
Could we show these by each school year for the valuation per student, but for each school year?
Yeah.
Not, I mean, we can do that.
I think, because I think it would be good for the, because sooner or later, we're going to get to the discussion that TIOS has been broken for a long time, depending on where you lived. And it's only been broken for a shorter time, depending on where you lived. So I think this particular chart should really show where it went up, ag went up, which is what percentage of the state, and then when suburban went up. Thank you.
That may take, breaking it out by the different sectors might be helpful in that analysis too, if that's the way the committee, if that's the way the committee decides to go and wants that information.
The other item that on the breakdown of district by district, pages 20 through 25 or whatever, the other caveat I think we need to note in there when you look at the valuation per student is one thing, but I've noticed a number of those districts have, that I know from experience, those districts have a lot of net option enrollment students flowing into those districts. So that number of valuation per student and one just south of me, Grand Island Northwest, that's really not a true indicator of what that district spends, because they get a huge amount of income from net option enrollment. So the valuation per student, we can look at that, well, that's really low. Well, they have a huge amount of income from other sources. So that valuation per student, a lot of cases, you have to put an asterisk by that, either district on both sides of North Platte, same way they have. So there's a lot of other income that flows into that district other than the valuation per student.
Any other questions for Bryce or comments on this topic? Bryce, do you have more?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you. Sarah, you are on, and thanks so much for your contribution. I got a sneak peek at what we're going to see, and I know you didn't throw it together in 5 minutes, so thank you.
You bet. All right, so I'll be addressing the report called Comparison of State and Property Valuation Structures in your packet. And at the last meeting, there was a discussion, because of Bryce's good data, showing the mix of local, state, and federal funding, to kind of dive into where those state funding sources in particular come from and how they compare then to those target states. So I did add Iowa into this mix just because Iowa has a very similar tax structure. It's probably one of the most similar in comparison of states near us. So the first several pages, pages 1 through 4, are just a look at total dollars as a percentage of general fund. of how states generate their tax dollars that then flow into funding the state contribution of schools and then everything else the state funds. So it's not just school spending, but it is general fund spending to look to see where those dollars come from. So the first few pages are just that. You can see that there's nothing too alarming there in that there's differences in the mix of individual and state income tax is probably the biggest change from state to state. Other is largely excise taxes, alcohol, tobacco, insurance taxes, various different taxes that states generate. The biggest thing that you'll see is when you get to the mineral states, that Wyoming, Montana, states that have Oklahoma, states that have other sources, natural resources that generate tax dollars. Wyoming collects a large amount of oil and gas taxation and different things like that. So those pages are just there to kind of give you a picture of how states fund their taxes. I think if you look at page 5, that's probably the most digestible picture in that it compares sales tax rates, individual and corporate income tax rates, and effective property tax rates from each of these states. Focusing on state sales tax rates, I added a column called sales tax breadth. That is an indicator provided by the tax foundation of what the sales tax base in those states is. So in other words, how broad or how narrow is the sales tax base? What sorts of things do they tax? What sorts of things do they exempt? I think the takeaway there is that as you compare the rates, you'll notice that largely those states with lower rates than Nebraska have generally a much broader sales tax base. Now, there's a couple of states that tax food at a smaller percentage. You'll find that in the footnotes that they don't appear to have a large sales tax base, but they do have that smaller component. So that is the picture there as we compare sales tax rates. And then, of course, individual and corporate income tax rates. I think those are all things that are, these are the sources of funds that the legislature has to evaluate and determine how to fund the things that we might ask them to fund. And then the effective property tax rate, I think, is, of course, the thing that we get the most press about here, right? We're a high property tax rate state. And so we are currently higher than every other state on this chart. Now, an effective tax rate, it considers assessment levels as well as actual tax rates. So we're going to dive into that a little bit as we talk about the assessments of those states. I just noted differences where there are differences. Ohio has a commercial activity tax in lieu of a corporate income tax. There's just South Dakota attributes a large percentage of its lottery funds to the general fund rather than taxation. Of course, South Dakota has no individual income tax rate or no income taxes at all. Ohio has no corporate sales tax rate, but they use their commercial activity. So that's just a comparison of state structures, probably more useful to us as we enter phase 2 of our plan, but just wanted to put that a bit together.
Sarah, could I ask a question just
You
for
bet.
clarification? You probably explained this and I just didn't pick up on it. What year, on page 5, when we're talking effective property tax rate, what year is that it represents? And then my second question, so you can answer both at the same time, is does that include the property tax credits?
2024 is the year. It does not include credits. So it doesn't. So credits are generally considered outside of levied taxes. So the comparison there is levied taxes.
Knowing that that's such a large portion now, the front-loaded tax credit that Senator Breezy spoke to earlier, is it possible if you take that revenue into account and mathematically consider it relative to that 1.43% to figure out what the effective rate would be for the purpose of comparison?
Yes, that's possible. Yep, we could do that. And that is not, I should say, that source is not our source of effective tax rates. That came from an outside source, but we have data on our website also. All right. Turning to page 6, this is what Bryce alluded to as a comparison of how other do
we know if these other states we're comparing to have similar a similar tax credit structure at all?
Every state has a very different tax credit structure, so that's something we can dive into certainly for phase 2. I don't think you'll find any state that has a similar a similar tax credit structure out there. They're all very unique. Many of them use a homestead tax credit program. Some of them are more broad than ours. Everybody has some, but I did not find anything that was truly comparable to our property tax credit structure.
Okay. So if we were going to factor in the tax credits in Nebraska and drive down the effective rate that way, we really have to examine the other states if they have something
Yes.
somewhat similar that would drive down their effective rate as we're
Yes,
comparing.
yes, and that would take some time, absolutely. Yeah.
And just so everyone understands the effective tax rate, that's the overall property tax rate relative to all uses of the funds, not just schools.
That is correct,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yes, yep. All right. Okay, turning to the assessment level and valuation constraints by state, that's where I think you'll see a myriad of differences in how states generate property tax valuation for property tax purposes. We are in Nebraska, a market value state. We value residential and commercial property at 100% of market value and agricultural property at 75% of market value. There are very few states that use a market value component for agricultural property. Almost all of them use a market value approach for residential and commercial. However, they're using a lower assessment level. And then, of course, personal property taxation varies significantly. Some states don't tax it at all. Most states tax personal property at market value and have some remaining component of personal property value. We use a net book system where we depreciate personal property in 5 to 15 years typically. So, and of course, personal property taxation is largely business taxation. It's not, we don't tax individuals for personal property tax, and almost no state does. So the biggest takeaways, and you can look at this and you can digest it and we can use it as a resource in the future, but the biggest takeaways are that most states have a lower threshold of an assessment level. You'll see it looking just down the list. Arkansas is at 18 to 20%. Montana is at 0.76% to 2.2%. Now that's a little bit not a good comparison because they use a mill levy system, and their mills are $600 per $1,000 on average. So their effective tax rate, if you look at the comparison of effective tax rate, isn't, I think they're at about $1 if I remember correctly. They're at 0.6%. So they are significantly less than us, but you wouldn't say that they're proportionately 2%, right? So you have to understand both the valuation side and the taxation side of each individual state. As far as agricultural use, I think what's important to note there, it's easy to say every other state does it, why don't we? However, it's worth noting that every state does it because it's controllable, right? It's a controllable valuation method. If you look at how they're doing the agricultural income approach and you dig into their legislative code, at this beginning of every use method was a calculation that got them to a desirable amount of dollars in taxation, right? So how they use the cap rate to come up with that value is a tax policy decision. So it's not something, it's easier to do. It seems more favorable. However, the question when we talk about a use approach, which we have in Nebraska in the last 10 years, talked about it a couple of times, is always what's the effect, right? And so I would just caution that the purpose of a use value system is the long-term aspect, right? The stabilization of agricultural land taxation over time. It is not necessarily a market-based approach, and so therefore it's also harder to understand. It's more difficult for taxpayers to wrap their mind around. So for instance, South Dakota, I think, was the most recent state to transition to a use value system, and I think it was about 2010. And when they did it, they transitioned at literally a cap rate that made them revenue neutral going in. So there is a little bit of a, I don't want to say arbitrary, but a tax policy component to that valuation structure. So I would happily answer any questions about that. I just laid it out there as a resource because I think those are the sorts of things that in phase 2 that we'll need to have available to us as we make recommendations. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah, for giving us this information. I'm going to go back to something that old Senator Linehan mentioned. What's your proper title? I don't even know. Luann. That Luann Linehan mentioned. Because she asked Bryce this, and she alluded to how there were some people that felt that the TIOZA formula wasn't working early, more rural, because she'd mentioned ag ground went up high 2010, 11, 12, and then now feeling the pain was residential as of closer to now in the 20s. You and I had an email exchange about since 2000, I believe it was, what ag has done, rising, and it's not in here. So I'm wondering if you could state that, because I'm asking this because within TIOZA, there are levers within the formula that can make adjustments for that if it happens. And that's also something, when we decided to set up this commission, that I felt like if that would have been in play for the last 20 years, and the legislature actually went by the recommendations of the commission, that the commission could have done some recommendations like that. Like, well, hey, this year ag ground went up 20%, residential went up 2%, therefore we recommend dropping within TIOZA, not how we value it, whatever, but, and that would have helped keep some of that state funding going to some of those areas that were really affected by that strongly during those years. So if you have that.
I do, yeah, I do have that, and we can share that with the committee after this meeting or for the next meeting. But in total, agricultural land values since 2020 have risen 421%.
Since 2000.
Since 2000.
Yeah.
Did I say 2020?
You said 2020, that's
Sorry, since 2000. Agricultural land values 421%, residential 277%, and commercial 231%. Now, taxation, luckily, is somewhat lower than that, but still high. Agricultural land taxes since 2000 have increased 259%, residential taxes 239%, and commercial taxes 202%. Now, that's in total. But I think specific to your point, we can look at this, and like I said, we'll provide it to all of you. We can look at this data and see those time periods where one sector rose faster than the other. So agricultural land rose from 2008 to 2015 at double-digit rates every year. 1 year as high as 29% on average across the state. In that time, taxes on agricultural land also rose by double digits every single year, as high as at the peak as 16% in an individual year. Agricultural land since 2015 has been flat to declining until we saw a fairly significant increase again in 2025. We won't have that data until publicly available until after the first of the year. Taxes or residential property, then everybody had a few years of a flat valuation structure across the state, or relatively flat. But residential land started, or property started increasing shortly after that, residential and commercial both. Residential most significantly starting at picking up to rates that were 1% to 2% for a number of years, to starting to climb to 5%, 6%, 7%. And in 2022 and 23, on average, we saw 8% and 9% increases across the state. Now, those are averages. We know in practical terms that we've had a lot of residential homeowners face double-digit valuation increases over the years. And actually, those are tax amounts. The valuation increases started at 4% to 6%, but in 2023, they were actually 16% for value and 9% for value in 2024. And I think approximately 8% to 9% again in 2025. So definitely there are times in which one sector rises more heavily than the other. Commercial tends to follow. Residential property can be a little softer, can be a little stronger, but tends to follow the same curves.
And if I can just make a comment to that, just coming from a more rural district, when that happens and the ag increases that significantly, like those early years, so in a district that has, half ag ground or even more, that school tax is now shifted extremely high on the ag owner versus residential. And that, I feel like, is when people started losing their minds in my neck of the woods, and now they're losing their minds in the urban side because of what we're seeing. But those are really critical components to the formula and how it's supposed to work. And so that is where I think this commission can be helpful. And it makes sense. We have also, I believe, lost, and maybe you know this, over 1 million acres of ag ground since 2000-ish, just because as residential areas or urban areas expand or businesses build, they're taking up ag ground to build their, the house, the building, the commercial building, whatever. We are always going to be in that state. We are always going to be losing more and more ag ground, and it's, as you lose ag ground, the value goes up. So this isn't going to end by any stretch now. So I think the numbers make sense that way and show that. So, thank you.
Right? Thank you. Yeah.
I have a quick question as well. So as we compare the states that you've identified here, is there anything to say that their valuations in those states are in pretty close alignment to what Nebraska's has been? And the real change, at least tax-wise, is based on what we have as the assessment levels.
Right. Well, so, again, every state has a different valuation structure. Every state has a different taxation structure also. So it's really hard to get into it's very technical to get to a true comparison of effectiveness from each state. But I think that probably the biggest takeaway is if you search the news in any of those states that are anywhere near an effective tax rate as high as ours, you'll hear nationally even concerns about property taxes, and that property taxes are too high, and that property taxes are a burden to homeowners, and of course, and here in Nebraska, certainly agricultural producers as well.
I guess one thing I want to bring front and center when we talk about ag land is the difference from state to state. And that's market rate versus cap rate. There has been a few attempts from time to time to change the cap rate, and that's why Iowa is a cap rate. In other words, how much does an acre produce? And that's why their ag land taxes are roughly half or less than what ours are. There's been some attempt in Nebraska to maybe move to a cap rate versus a market rate. Has not worked out that way. But as you look through this chart, we really have to be aware that how we value ag land. It's market rate, and it's not what the land will actually produce. And we're in a period of time here, could be 3 or 4 or 5 years, when that cap rate is really low. But the taxes required of that acre of farmland is not going to change. So just a side note that I guess I want to mention that we're very different in how we assess our land versus other states around us.
You know offhand the percentage of property taxes paid on ag land versus residential versus commercial?
I do, I think. So in 2024, I don't have the percentages. I can give you the dollar amounts. We could calculate them here roughly. Ag land paid taxes of $1.1 billion. Residential paid 2.8. Commercial paid slightly under a billion, 916 million. Total property tax dollars were 5.3 billion in that year. So there's the missing component in those numbers as you're producing them is personal property taxation and centrally assessed value, state assessed values, railroads, and public utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Sarah? Sarah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. So we're going to go back into our groups at this point and talk, really kind of answer the same questions. What key information stood out to you from the reports from Bryce Wilson and Sarah Scott? 2, what information from these reports relates to the Phase 1 work of this commission? 3, what discussion points might this group offer for discussion to the larger commission for Phase 1 work recommendations? And I want to take a little time in your groups too to address issues, the following issues. What progress has been made to increase the state contribution to school funding? And then what might be a target percent or range for the state contribution to school funding? And that talks about, as each group talked about, the flip that we've experienced in recent years in the state contribution to school funding. So with that, go. We'll just kind of gauge how it works here, but I'm sure we'll be in group work until at least 10:45. So for those of you who are in the gallery wondering, I would say it'll be at least 10:45 before we come back in the large group. Now we'll
I
go.
bet you like the 1 o'clock hour meeting better. 1 o'clock time better.
I do. I don't
Is
mind
it
driving in the morning, but
3.5 hours?
Residential and commercial
Sorry, you went home tonight.
it's Halloween.
I know. It's by, yeah.
277.
It's by district.
School day.
Or by,
Gotcha.
it's hard to find your school.
You gotta know what your school number is.
This is a 2-minute warning, and we'll start the large group again. 2 minutes. Okay, we'll start back up for the report out here. And it was recommended in our group that we have Dr. Schwartz go last this time, so that it didn't take everybody's thunder.
That may be the best recommendation that came out of today, Dr. Maher. Well played.
That's all we got.
We'll start with our group and Chancellor Turman.
Okay. In response to that first question related around kind of the key information, what do we see was the most valuable from the new information today? Certainly, I think almost everything that was reported extremely important. It does drive, I think, the discussion. I think the question then becomes, to what extent does adding all that additional layer of context into the report help us or dilute the focus that we have? And I think we also talked quite a bit about really understanding kind of where our lanes are. Are we here to develop and establish tax policy or outline recommendations that we use to help kind of move things forward? Overall, I think our important goal drives to the last sets of questions that Dr. Maher had identified. What are we trying to achieve in terms of the distribution of school funding, and how do we use setting some benchmarks there as a way to help then model where state tax policy maybe needs to go going forward? From the information, what do we really want to try to incorporate from the new information today? I think we talked quite a bit about the information on page 7 of what Bryce provided, that historical context around the changes in valuation based on the size of the schools. Dr. Plass actually had gone through, and I was wondering why he was doing hand calculations as the reports were being given. And one of the things, clearly looking at valuations that are below $1 million, and that any school, based on the most recent data that had assessed value above the 95 cents, they tend to fall in basically one of 3 categories. They either have very low valuations, a low number of students, or are coming from one of the reservation schools in our state. And so I think valuations per student is really an important data point that we need to make sure is incorporated into the conversation. We talked a little bit about benchmarks, and I think the fact that we've gotten almost to 53% is really an important milestone. And I think we would not want to see ourselves regress from that. And so as we talked about what is probably the most important window, you really do need to see, after the full kind of iteration of the changes that were made several years ago, we've hit kind of that high point. Will we see some additional growth over the next few years just as an offshoot of that? But we talked about maybe trying to set a goal of 60% by the time within the next 7 years. And that would give us the opportunity to incorporate some elements of inflation. So what does getting to 60%, when you assume inflationary costs at what rate they've been the last 7 years, and what is that total cost to the state, and ultimately where would those resources eventually come from under the existing tax policy or adjustments? And we allow those that are more versed in that area to be able to accomplish that. So those are the conversations that we had. Anything else I would add from our group?
Yeah, I would just say that that any deviation from where we are, we're thinking was more of a phase two conversation, and that our hope would be that there wasn't any regression for this coming session for phase one. So while we did talk about where we might go in the future, we thought that would be more phase two than phase one.
Yeah, I think adding to that a little bit, we did spend a lot of time saying, number one, we just need to make sure there's no erosion of current state funding. We're at that 53%. Let's spend some time initially figuring out what do we got to do to maintain that at 53%. We've identified, obviously, some levers earlier that have mechanisms put in place to ensure that they continue to fund at a higher rate, and we have some that are static. And so maybe just reviewing those, number one, ensuring that 53 stays 53. And then after we've done that, maybe we can look forward and say, all right, if we would like that percentage to go higher, what would that look like? But I think it would probably be best, in my opinion at least, that we slow that decision down to make sure that we are all really comfortable with what we have in place, making sure that stays in place, and before we start looking to the future. Just because, you want to measure twice and cut once. I think if we just put a number on it, we haven't quite done that concept justice. So I think we put some time into making that decision.
Next group.
Okay, one of our observations from the data points shared was actually, even though the range is kind of large, considering the variation of school district circumstance and size across the state, we thought the spread in looking at the different data sets being 20 to 60%, with a lot of school districts falling in that 40, 60% when you look at the pie charts, was really interesting and kind of not expected. So that trend where things are coming closer together was just an observation point that we had, that with the variation of circumstance, with the more state funding, it has kind of brought things a little bit closer together. We also had an observation that as we talk about the state funding, it might be worthwhile separating what's coming through the TIOSA formula, because a school district might think of that as state funding, versus we are now encompassing the credits with that, and whether we need to talk about both of those and kind of highlight when we talk state funding, we are talking both of these, because the credits now, the school districts receive that in state funding, and that did come through on our financial reports this year, but it's not what's certified to you when you're building your budget. So I think from a school perspective, that feels a little bit different. We had a lot of conversation about how do we quantify and evaluate where we are as a school, as ranked nationally. So for property taxes, income taxes, and sales tax, we had the conversation about it will be somewhat complicated to include the credits when we look across states. It will probably take some time and potentially be a phase two to really identify where we are. I know that we had specifically two members of our group, former Senator Breezy and Senator Merman, who would like to see us closer to the middle, where the perception is we've always been very high as far as property taxes across the state. So we were curious how that evaluation could occur, and if we take our credits into account, you'd have to take credits from other states into account. But with the big investment, there's a question mark on where are we ranked today. We had some fairly, I would say, significant points of disagreement on how aspirational of a goal this committee would set for a target. We had Senator Merman Boley say 75%. I will own that I expressed concern about that level. I do think that we need to remember as a state that we really relied on property as a main resource. It also is something we said had a lot of local control. And by local control, I think we've been a little bit not clear in defining that as school districts. And when I think about local control, is a Board of Education right now has local ability to appropriate funds to meet strategic goals, to advance their school district. And if we diminish that local board's authority to appropriate funds, because all of the appropriation comes through the state, that would be concerning, and I expressed that myself independently. I know that both Senator Breezy was very interested in where we rank and how that plays out as far as effective property taxes and the concern of property taxpayers, and that was also shared by Senator Merman. We know that property is a very stable tax source, has been. I did look into the last time that state funds were cut. So the bill was passed in 2017 and it went all the way through the 2019 school year. So with so much respect for the senators who have been strong and committed to full funding of TIOSA the most recent year, I want to be super clear about that, because that's taken some fortitude to say we're not going to cut state aid, we're going to fully fund. From a school perspective, full funding has only happened for a handful of years compared to decades of potentially not was perceived as full funding. So, so just that kind of that balance. And so we were more, what is that middle of the road? We did have conversations about, at a very minimum, Senator Merman shared we need to maintain where we are now at a very minimum. So I think we did have support and consensus in our group that maintaining where we are now at the 53% was a good call, but some significant points of disagreement on what type of range. I did propose maybe a range as opposed to one number, might be more logical for the future when we look at that data set. So I want to be fair to the conversation. We had some disagreement on tax, whether we're the right ones to set tax policy and what that shift looks like from sales and income to property taxes. So what else would anyone like to add?
What was your range then?
Well, we didn't really quite get to one. We were middle. I was more 40 to 55, encompassing what we are now, and it was a question of whether we want to be aspirational, but we did come to consensus that not losing ground was important. Yeah.
We talked about range in our group too, but we never talked about what that range might look like. So, but we did have the conversation on if it's not a number, maybe it's a range.
I'm not going, there we go. The only thing maybe to add would be phase one, remain, don't lose ground. Phase two, let's figure out what that percentage should be.
And based on the data sets of maybe where we rank nationally. Yep.
Which I think is what your group kind of said also.
That's exactly what we said. Yep. Okay, with that, Dr. Schwartz, anything to add?
Oh, that was a really strategically framed
Thought I'd throw you
question,
another
Dr.
softball.
Maher. I'm starting to get a hint that maybe I talk too much. A couple things, you know, the data on the chart that Bryce shared on page 7, that's really powerful data. And there's 100 different ways you could play with the narrative that shares. But we talked a lot about how, you know, most school districts in the state right now are between that 41 and 60%. And that is a fundamentally better place than where we were at even 5 years ago. And that's a positive. So however we want to tell that story, or maybe it's just like it's told here, that seems to be something that we spent some time on. We also looked at some of the district by district data and looked at, we looked at Seward County because that's where Senator Hughes is at, and you have a really interesting dichotomy. You have Milford, Seward, and Centennial, and they have very different levy rates, very different valuations per pupil, and it seems like the front-loaded tax credit creates an effective tax rate that provides a tighter proportion of state funding than maybe what the levy communicates. So that measuring stick doesn't necessarily, the measuring stick that is the tax rate may not be the best measuring stick with the great work that's been done with the property tax credit. We had just talked about two things. Number one is, and I think Dr. Turman had shared this, we were really hesitant to go down the tax policy front. We don't feel like the statute gives us authority to talk about what should be taxed and to what degree. And while that's good information, and I think what we talked about is in phase 3, knowing that different classifications of property have different cycles for how they're impacted, those may be levers that impact a school funding formula later on, but the policy of what's taxed and to what degree isn't necessarily our lane. Let's see here. From a percent standpoint, We probably could have got that settled just before you pulled us together. Senator Lenahan challenged another member of this group to a paper, rock, scissors in order to settle it. But that was not in our operating procedure, so I wasn't sure how to handle that as a table facilitator. Kidding aside, I think we all agreed we got to hold on to where we're at. Like, that's the most important thing, is at minimum, we need to stay where we're at. Beyond that, if we were to set a goal, I think there was variance. I think we all agreed that having a goal that's somewhere greater than where we're at now is positive, and the range of the conversation we had started was as high as 75 and as low as 60, but we certainly didn't get to consensus on where that was. But does that capture our conversation, guys? Yeah, go ahead.
I do think I don't think we can fix this or even know how to fix it before December 1st, but I do think the report needs to say the reasons that the funding for schools, we've got to fix the valuation problem. We have to fix the swings, because your valuations go up, your TOS goes down. We have to fix that. And I don't know that we'll have the answer for the fix by December 1, but I think as a committee, we should say it needs to be fixed, because, and you can help me here, Doctor, because the biggest things the schools worry about is how there's, or not, they've got many things to worry about, but one of the things when it comes to finances is your big swings, when your valuations go up. And then you have to turn around, we're saying, the legislature, not me, but the legislature saying, well, we increase school funding, but you've got to explain, because to your, and nobody can explain it really well, because valuations went up, your taxes are going up. That's got to be addressed.
So the conversation we had here is around volatility. And so, you know, when it comes to the percentage, just for transparency, the comment I had made is, you know, I would rather have a lower percentage, let's say 60%, that we were able to stick to, than a higher percentage that had a lot of volatility around it. And having a measured approach so that we knew we were for certain we could create a stable ride for the taxpayer and for schools. So that was really a healthy conversation, I thought, that we had around that topic.
Can I say one thing too? That, to what Luann and Dr. Schwartz are saying, is TIOZA caused some of that volatility because it was working how it was intended. As valuations went up, that district had the means to pay for it, so the state didn't have to come in. And that's, again, we're gonna say it again, that's what we're hoping this commission can do going forward, is saying, hey, we see what happened with valuations. This is our recommendation to ensure that we're keeping the 53% or wherever we're at state funding going out to the schools. That's like, let's use TIOZA as it was created to do that, so we decrease some of that volatility.
Excellent. Full group conversation. Anything to add to what's been stated? Seemed like we all got a little more comfortable there, just kind of adding as we went, so. I'll give one more opportunity for anybody on the commission.
I would just say thank you to everyone who pulled together data and information. I think it was really valuable to sink our teeth into factual information as opposed to anecdotal information, and I know that's a lot of work for your team, Dr. Maher, and certainly Sarah for you as well, so thank you all for doing that.
Thank you. I know Bryce and his team really do well, and this was my first time to really work.
Dr. Maher, real quick, I think it's worth noting this, from the school district side, I want to reiterate what Dr. Schwartz said, which was, if it's a lower number and a lower level of volatility, from the school district side, that's a really good thing. The high volatility is very difficult. So we had a similar discussion. I want to make note of that.
I want to thank Sarah. It's my first time really to work closely with you. Well done, and appreciated your, number one, willingness to be a part of it, but also the thoroughness that you reported. So, thank you. The next portion of our agenda is to the public comment period. there is nobody that has requested to speak through the public comment period. So I'm going to begin the closing of the meeting here by saying, by meeting today, we have met the second quarter obligation of state statute that says that we have to meet once every quarter. We've now done that. But I would also remind you that we will meet again on November 18th. And in December, we have no meeting scheduled unless somebody wants to make that request at the November 18th meeting. Good luck finding a date if you do make that request. The second thing I would say, or the next thing I would say is, we have 17 out of 18 commission members here today. I really appreciate everybody's juggling of schedules, because I know we had several who said, I don't think I can make it on that particular day, but somehow or another you did. I think we're really getting some things done. I thought today was a very good day to begin having not just conversations, but conversations and maybe disagreements within groups. And I think those are things that we're going to have to do if we're going to get anything of significance done. So I want to thank you for that. And with that, I will ask if anybody has anything to offer for the good of the commission. Seeing no hands, I want to thank you. I want to send out a thank you to those who attended in person and who tuned into the broadcast. The next meeting of the School Financing Review Commission, hang on, is November 18th at 1 p.m. This meeting is adjourned.